All right, everyone, good morning and welcome to the Four Pillars Temple study group on signs and sigils, how to read them and use them in magic. So this presentation is a study group presentation for the Four Pillars Temple, but it is also an opportunity for us to really get together and do a workshop and practice a lot of the things that we're learning. So this is going to be a working meeting. So what we'll do is we're going to be practicing the things and putting into place the things that we're learning in this session. So there's a couple supplies that you're going to need for this workshop. The first thing you're going to need is you are going to need two pens. You're going to need a red pen and you're going to need a black pen. So you'll need those. You're also going to need a piece of tracing paper. So I provided everyone with a piece of tracing paper. You're also going to need a piece of just regular white scratch paper because we're going to be using that too. You'll need a copy of the witch's sigil wheel. This is what it looks like, and you'll see it again in the presentation. But the witch's sigil wheel is what we're going to use to create some of those sigils. So you'll need that. And then I also got everyone a piece of colored paper. It's like a orange or yellow. So everyone needs a piece of colored paper. I've cut everyone pieces of paper out. And so those are the main things that you're going to need. If you need the PowerPoint or the notes parts for the presentation, those can be sent to you, but everyone should have a copy also of a handout with all of that. So let's go ahead and get started in this presentation. So this is a presentation on signs and sigils, again, how to read them and use them in magic. So let's talk a little bit about some of the things that you are going to learn in this presentation. So in this presentation, you're going to learn how to create and bless your work, how to create and draw your own magical name, how to use magical implements to create sigils. You're going to learn a little bit about some magical alphabets to assist you in writing and to create magical sigils and use them as well as magical squares and the use of the witch's sigil wheel. And then finally, we'll also have time to practice creating magical sigils and seals in this workshop. So that's going to be a lot of fun. Now, this workshop is intended for individuals that have some level of knowledge about sigils, about that sort of thing. So, excuse me, so you're going to have to dig into your knowledge about what these symbols mean, what these signs mean. If you don't have them, there's a couple of things that we can do. So a couple of things I want to recommend before we dive into everything. I brought a couple of books with me that I want to share with you guys. The first book is called Sigil Witchery by Laura Tempest Sackroff. This is a great book. I think it's kind of limited in some of the things. It doesn't really go too much into depth about different symbols themselves, but it talks a lot about how you can use certain like circles, dots, lines, triangles, squares, kind of the basic symbols to create magical sigils. So this is a really great book, Sigil Witchery. Another book that I wanted to show you all that I brought with me too is just a basic book about symbols, and it's called Chinese Symbolism and Art Motifs. And this was written, it's an older book. It was actually given to me. It was written by C.A.S. Williams. So this is a really great book too that has just all sorts of symbols of Eastern, Eastern imagery and symbolism. So this is a great book. It's always good to have a book on symbols to kind of dig into and start working on. Another book that I wanted to share with everyone is called The Tao of Craft by Ben Belwen. This is a great text, especially as it relates to Eastern esoteric practices related to creating sigils and what they call Fu Talisman. So we're going to talk a little bit about Fu Talisman in this presentation, and then we're also going to use it in our work today as well. So we're going to have a little bit of a meeting of East and West. And then the last book I want to share with you is just a primer on signs and symbols. This one's called the Signs and Symbols Source Book by Adele Nodzadar. And this is a great book. Any book about signs and symbols will do for this presentation. And so I really think it's a great opportunity for you all to be able to kind of look through these books and say, okay, what does this symbol mean and how does it relate to what I'm trying to do? So getting some sort of book on symbolism, a source book on symbolism is going to be really great. So I absolutely would recommend getting getting that in your sigil crafting work. Okay, so let's go ahead and dive into this presentation. So I want to kind of let you all understand the context of what we're doing here by explaining a little bit about mythology. So myths are the stories about the gods, right, and their dealings with human beings. This is how the gods relate with us. And so these are those stories. Some people see them as scripture. Some people see them as just like myths that have been carried by our family or by our culture. Symbols, on the other hand, are those sacred images of the gods that connect to our unconscious mind, right? So that's the way that we connect with God through our mind, is by using these symbols. And then ritual is how we interact with the gods through a ritualized form of actions and practices and language to help us in connecting with those myths using those symbols, right? So the ritual is the reenactment, the symbols is the way that we connect, and the myth is the thing that we're reconnecting to, right? So it's important that we recognize that we need all of these pieces in order to really engage in the process of sigil magic and sigil work. Our entire lives are filled with symbols, and it's also one of the earliest forms of writing, which was pictography. And how we wrote, we would originally write by drawing pictures of things, right? This picture represents this thing. So symbols will bypass our conscious mind and allow us to interact on a deeper level. And we use that to create a deeper sense of meaning with things. So success in sigil crafting is going to require us to have some knowledge of various symbols. That's why I'm recommending some of these books for you. So I want you all to just kind of keep that in mind. So I want to dive into our first activity today, which is empowering our sigil pen. So I invite you to pick up your red pen, and we're going to go ahead and we're going to empower this pen. Now, the color red in and of itself is a symbol, right? The color red represents something. That's why I've chosen red for the colors of my presentation. Red represents life. Red represents the lifeblood. Red represents that sort of energy source, that sort of liveliness, that sort of empowerment, right? And so a lot of cultures use red to write their symbols. For example, we look at the Vikings or the Norse individuals, right? The Viking lands, the Norse, they used red to write the runes because red represented blood, and sometimes they would use blood to write runes with, right? Also in the Eastern cultures, they use red to empower and write their sigils or their food talisman. So we're going to empower our red pen. So I invite you to pick up your red pen. And what I want you to do is we're going to go to the next slide. Maybe. Oh, went too far. There was a little lag. All right, so I want you to select your pen that we're going to use for the purpose of sigil creation, which will be this red pen. And I want you to ground and center. So just take a moment to allow yourself to just clear and release. Allow yourself to feel your presence in this room, in this space. Bring your attention to the breath, your breath as it goes in and as it comes out. And I invite you to turn your attention to the pen. And I want you to visualize that the energy is entering through your crown chakra. And as it enters through the crown chakra, it is passing through your body and through your hands and into this writing instrument. And I want you to see the pen flushed of negative energy, and that it is ritually cleansed. So take a moment to just imagine that. And we say this affirmation. Through the agencies of my higher power, I cast out impurities and malignancy from this pen in both the world and the mundane and the realm of the astral. With the divine power, may this pen be consecrated and made whole and holy to perform this sigil work. So it is.
So it is.
And then I want you to take, if you have holy water or if you have some Florida water, and we're going to just put a little bit on our hands and we're going to put a little bit on the pen. We're going to just put it and cover the pen with that water, imagining that imagining that connecting to it. Okay, so now we are prepared to begin our sigil work. So what I want you to do is I want you to take a look at my presentation, and I want you to see if there are any sigils that you have a strong reaction to on the next page. So go ahead and just clear your mind and I want you to notice whatever you notice when I show you these symbols. Okay. Just look at these symbols. What are you seeing? What do you see here? What are you drawn to? What are you maybe repulsed by? Johnny, what's coming up for you when you first see these symbols?
Oh, the one in the far left upper corner is a peace sign.
Okay. Do you feel like you have a positive feeling about that?
Gives me a happy hippie vibe.
Yeah, right. So there's a cultural component to this, right? We see this symbol and we think, okay, peace, love, right? Like, okay, well, I got that. That kind of brings to mind pastels and tie-dye and hippies, right? Okay, what else? Is there anything else on here that you see that you're like,
The one in the middle top makes two things.
okay,
An ambulance and Hermes.
an ambulance and Hermes? Yeah, and I love this symbol. And the interesting thing about the symbol is this is the staff of Hermes. This is not the medical staff. A lot of people confuse this because along the way, I think it was the Middle Ages, it actually got confused. And so this symbol is actually the staff of Hermes or the caduceus, right? Now, when we think of medicine, people think of this. This is not the staff of medicine. The staff of medicine is the staff of Asclepius, who is the god of medicine. And Asclepius's staff actually only has one serpent and it doesn't have wings. It has one serpent. But somewhere along the way in our collective unconscious, this has become connected with medicine, medical field. And now you'll see it on ambulance, things like that. But that's actually just the caduceus. What else? Is there anything else that's like, you're like, oh,
The upper right says warning toxicity.
how do you feel when you see that?
Like I should be cautious.
Yes, right? So in our collective unconscious, this symbol has come to represent something negative, right? And so now that it represents something negative, immediately we get like a visceral reaction, like, oh, I gotta stay away from that, right? If any of you guys are old enough to remember Mr. Yuck, did you have Mr. Yuck growing up?
Yes.
Yeah, so Mr. Yuck, if you guys are too young to remember that, Mr. Yuck were these little stickers, these green stickers of this face, and it was like, ugh. And it was called Mr. Yuck. And I remember growing up, my parents would put Mr. Yuck stickers on things that were yuck. So things that I wasn't supposed to touch, like bleach, right? Chemicals, cleaning supplies, things that I wasn't supposed to touch, Mr. Yuck was on it. So as I grew up, Mr. Yuck, like, oh, stay away from that. Nope, no, right? And so for us, as an adult, this symbol hopefully will have some sort of visceral reaction. I included a lot of these symbols for a reason because they look similar. A lot of people might see this symbol and think, okay, this looks similar to this symbol, right? This is actually the symbol of the triple god. These are crescent moons, and these are sometimes represents the horns, or sometimes they represent the triple god, but it's very similar, right? But I'm sure we have a different feeling about this than this. Some people that were maybe raised in Christian households might look at this symbol and think, oh, this looks demonic, this looks scary, right? Well, really, this is a ceremonial magic seal for murmur. You can see murmur around the outside, and this is the sigil inside.
That one
So
kind of reminds me of a clock for some reason.
a clock, you get some like, yeah, I could see that because it has like these pieces around it. So that represents the seal of murmur, who I believe is a demon in the Goetia. So again, I included these because I wanted you to see, these are all images from Google, but I wanted you kind of just to have a minute to kind of feel and sense these symbols, because these symbols connect to our unconscious and allow us to kind of experience this. This is a very visceral, physical experience. So I just wanted to let you experience that. So let's talk a little bit about magical alphabets. And so the first method that I want to teach you of how to use or how to create sigils is by using magical alphabets. So many ceremonial magicians place a really high emphasis on magical alphabets because many of the alphabets are almost entirely used in this way. Some of the alphabets were created and they've been so difficult that they're really not in use much anymore these days. And for ceremonialists, many of the alphabets are simply ways of encoding their work and they really serve little purpose in magic. So they really would just use them as a way to protect their teachings or to protect their grimoires so that they were not being stolen or being used or prying eyes or not able to see or read what was taking place. So they were more about coding than they were about magic. However, as we've kind of moved out of that day and age, they're becoming more magical. And so you'll see things like Enochian, passing or crossing the river script. The daggers are most exclusively used by ceremonial magicians. These are forms of writing. And a lot of times, again, they were used in writing in the Book of Shadows. Now, the Theban alphabet is most commonly used among Wiccans today, and it is used so frequently that it has been called the witch's alphabet. We're going to see that in a minute here. Theban is probably the most practical for Wiccan use because it is easier to learn, to use, and to understand, and it's a one-to-one, from English to Theban. The runes are a truly magical alphabet because they can be used for writing as well as for magic and spell work. So we're going to see all of these alphabets, and we're going to kind of go through them quickly because we're not going to learn them today necessarily, but in your handouts, in your PDFs, you should have these alphabets available to you. And as we see all the alphabets that you're going to see, these images were collected from Google and they're in public domain. I tried my hardest to make sure that all of the material in this is in the public domain. So let's take a look here at the first alphabet. I'm sorry, there's a lag with my presentation. The first alphabet is the Theban alphabet, right? Now, this is attributed to Honorius of Thebes, which was later published in 1518, and again by the occult writer Agrippa in the Middle Ages. It was popular in ceremonial magical circles. So this is the alphabet that we will use. As Wiccans, we use them a lot, and so you can use this in your spell work and your magic. And so, again, this is in the public domain, but you can Google it, you can look it up and find a different version or a better version. But if you look, it has A through Z essentially, and it has all of the symbols, right? So I want you to take just a minute to look at these symbols, and we're going to refer back to them a little bit later in the presentation. But here's one magical alphabet, the Theban alphabet or the witch's alphabet. The next alphabet is called the Ogham. Do not pronounce an O-ham, it's Ogham. The Ogham alphabet, which is an ancient writing style that was used during the medieval period to write the Irish language. Okay, these were often written in a vertical way, so you'll see that they are in vertical on this presentation because they were written vertically. They were often written along the edge of monuments or on the edge of stelae, which are stone monuments, like vertically skinny, narrow, tall stone monuments, and they would write along the edges of them. So if you look, you'll see that there's this central line that's kind of like the grounding line, and then all these like lines will come off of it because the intention is that you would draw these lines along the edges of the stele. In modern writing, though, you can see them sometimes written on their side. So you might see them written on their side like this with the vertical line going horizontally, or you might see them still written vertically like this. So this is a really great alphabet to use if you find connection with the Irish and Celtic lands. This could be a great alphabet. Each letter also has a correspondence with tree symbolism. So this alphabet is really rooted deeply in Celtic symbolism. Not only does it have this symbol in the alphabet to write, but it also is connected to the trees, and then each letter has a tree. Also, it's connected to the tree calendar. So there's a lot of connections here in sort of the Celtic mind with even just this. So there's symbols within symbols within symbols. The next alphabet is called the Futhark runes or Futhark runes. In German, they don't use a th sound. It becomes like a T sound. So like the name Elizabeth would be Elizabeth. There's no th sound, but again, there is a th in the Futhark runes. So Futhark runes are named after the first letters of the runes. So Futhark, Futhark, right? So these are the runes. I apologize, up on this big screen, they do look a little bit pixelated, but these are examples of the runes. Now, each rune is related to, again, there's symbols within symbols. Each rune is related to a particular idea, and it even goes further still. So for example, the rune for A Ensus, right? It represents the god Odin as well. So you'll see there's a lot of connections here. Radio represents things like travel, right? Gable represents gift giving and exchange, right? So they all have their own meanings. In addition, we're going to talk a little bit more about the meanings later on. But here's another alphabet. So if you're going to spell out something, you could use this alphabet as well. So these Futhark runes are depicted in several styles. So they have the Elder Futhark, they have the Younger Futhark, as well as Icelandic and Danish runes. So you'll see there's a little bit of variation as you go. I've always really been connected with the Futhark runes because they're much easier and they I think are a little bit more discernible. When you start getting into the Icelandic and the Danish runes, they can look so similar, it's hard to tell. The Elder style is often most used in magic and sigil work. So this style is the one that's used mostly in sigil work. Each character, as I said, has its own meaning, its own history, and its own cultural connection. So we're going to talk more about that here too. The next alphabet is called the Pictish runes. Pictish runes is another alphabet, but there's really minimal information on this. I think that Raymond Buckland talks about using the Pictish runes, and you see them a little bit, but there's not as much information available on them, but here's just another script you can use. So there's minimal information, and what information they have is not terribly historically accurate. So I just want you to be mindful that there is some liberties that you take when you use this alphabet, but it's just another example of a writing style that you can use, right? To help write things out if you feel so inclined or you feel really drawn to this alphabet. And then the last alphabet that I want to talk about is not really an alphabet per se, but it's going to figure into what we're talking about here in just a few minutes. So this is a discussion on kind of Chinese characters. So these characters are often used in creation of talismans or in food talismans. And there's an example here of what a food talisman looks like. And we're going to dissect one a little bit later, and you're going to have an opportunity to practice making it. But modern Chinese, there are several versions of Chinese, right? There's simplified Chinese, which is kind of more modern, and then there's traditional Chinese. And modern Chinese writing is based upon pictographs. So the original Chinese language started as pictographs. And so I gave an example here. So for example, this is how you might draw a tortoise, and this is what the modern image of the tortoise is. This might be how you would show something as above you. If you look, it might be like a person and that's showing above, and then it turned into this symbol, for example, right? This is how people may have drawn a stag or a deer in the past, and this is maybe how it turned out, right? And so you'll see some of these, and these very commonly used Chinese characters are simplified, right? So you'll see like bright, moon, below, above, mountain, or they say hill, but this is the symbol for mountain, Shen. So you'll see all of these symbols, and they're very simple for the most part. Some of those are pretty complicated, but for the most part, they're relatively simple because they were created from very simple pictographs, right? So one thing that I want to tell you about this is that the symbols for sun and moon figure a lot in food talismans. And the reason why is because moon represents feminine and represents yin energy, and the sun, yang, represents masculine energy. And so we'll talk a little bit more about how those relate, but I want you to keep that in mind because you're going to see these images. So if you look here, unfortunately, sun is not on this example, but if you look here under bright, you'll see that the character for bright is the character for sun and the character for moon. So sun, moon means bright. So you'll see there's sun and moon together in this case. And then moon is separately, Yue is separately there. So again, you'll see these examples and we'll talk a little bit more about them. And here's an example of what a food talisman looks like. There's the drawing on the top and there's seals that were put periodically throughout. And we'll talk about seals here in just a minute. I want to show you another example of food talismans as we're talking about them. So this is what the food talisman looks like. Now, these examples come from Ben Bell Wen under Creative Commons licensure, so I'm allowed to share them. Food talismans, or the art of food talisman creation, relies heavily upon sacred Eastern symbolism, such as things like I Ching, Chinese characters, Eastern geomancy, something that's called the Bagua, which is related to I Ching, and numerology. So feng shui also plays a part in the use of the food creation. And some fu are not printed clearly, but appear to be scribbled. So you might, like these examples are printed very clearly, and you can kind of see like, oh, okay, this is obviously done by a computer, and it's very clear, and it's very digitized. But you're going to see some, like on the previous slide, this here is very scribbled, you can't read that, and there's a reason for that. The reason is because the person who created it knows what it's supposed to say, and it really doesn't matter that you understand what it says, because the energy is still the same. There's another style, which you're gonna see later on, which we call cloud style. Ben Bowen talks about it, called cloud style, and basically it looks like scribbles, but it looks like clouds. And you can't make it out, but that again doesn't matter, because it's more about the intention and what the creator is doing, and you'll see that later. Each talisman is sealed with a personal stamp or lineage temple stamp. So these ones don't have a stamp, but on the previous slide, this is a stamp that would be stamped on there. And you're gonna see a little bit more in just a minute too. So if you look at these sigil or these food talismans, what is there any symbols that you recognize on here? Look at these symbols, for example.
Triangle.
Yeah, what are those symbols for?
They remind you something druid related?
These are the symbols for the elements: fire, earth, air, water.
Okay.
So these are actually food talismans for each of the elements. But you'll see how there's a relationship between some Chinese and also some Eastern metaphysical things too. So at the top, there's what we call the bagua, and then right here, this is an example, this is what's called the bagua. So there are 8 trigrams, they're called trigrams, 3 lines. There are 8 trigrams in the bagua. Bagua stands for 8 trigrams. So you'll see these are different trigrams, but the trigrams are chosen obviously to reinforce these different elements. So you'll see all this imagery, right? And then up here, there's some Chinese characters that I cannot read, but they're related to the elements as well, right? So these are sigils, these are food talismans related to the elements. So we'll talk more about that a little bit later. And here's another example of foo. So what do you see in these 2 examples of foo? I asked you to pay special attention to 2 Chinese characters. What do you see in these examples for foo? This is one that's for physical health, and this is one for warding off evil or warding from evil. What do you see? Are there any symbols that jump out at you?
The symbols in the corners,
What does that look like?
an eye,
Close, moon,
okay.
and that looks like a sun.
Sun.
Right? So we're gonna see the symbols a little bit later, but there is a when we talk about like astrology and the symbols for astrology, you'll see that the Western symbol for sun is a circle with a dot in the middle. That's the symbol for sun in Greek classical sort of iconography, right? But it's very similar to the Chinese character for sun, which is right here. So you'll see there's all this sun, right? There's all this yang energy that's really coming out in this foo. So when you have this, it's talisman for warding off of evil, right? That fire, that burning, that yang, that strong energy, that protective energy that's forcing away evil, right? So even though we don't know what these symbols are, we know that these symbols are creating a lot of power and energy in this foo. And in this one, we see the moon and the sun, and then we see the bagua around it, and then we see in the middle, this is called, it's like a symbol for happiness, a general symbol for happiness and like good luck. Fushulu, maybe, I can't remember. There's 3 parts to it that represent the 3 gods of like prosperity and wealth. So here are some examples of different foo, just to kind of create some context for you. Let's move on. All right, so what we're going to do now is we're going to talk about finding your magical signature. Okay, so your magical signature is an important part of your sigil work. It represents you. It represents your authority, and it represents your consent for the sigil to be created. So when we create a magical sigil and we put our signature on it, we're saying, I am backing this thing, I'm giving my permission for this thing to happen, and I'm using my power to enforce or consent to this. Any deities Any elements or elementals or spirits that you call upon in the sigil will be entered into a contract with the person who creates the sigil. And so by using your signature, you're making this kind of contract with them. Also, your magical signature is a symbol or group of symbols which represent you. This can simply be your name, which is written in one of the magical alphabets that we did, or it could be a separate sigil made by combining either Latin letters or letters from other magical scripts into a single image. And I'm going to show you what that looks like. So get prepared because you're going to be doing this yourself here in just a minute. So let's look at some examples, and I'm going to give you my personal example of my magical signature. So what I did was I used my name, my craft name, which is Aphren. It's been Aphren for years and years. I used my craft name. However, Aphren in runes would be spelled with an F instead of with a PH, like I spell in English. And what I've done is I've layered them to create the sigil. So you see the runes up here, Aphren, and I've layered them together to create this symbol. That would be the symbol of my name if I was using that as like my signature, right? I would inscribe that on the talisman or on the sigil and say, this is under my authority, do I make this sigil? You also can create what I call using the stave style. So I've taken all of the characters and I've wrote them on a single axis. So you see there's A, F, R, E, and N, and I kind of put them into my own stave style. And we're going to see the different styles in a minute. So this is just an example of how I could use my name and make it into a sigil. Any questions about that?
No.
Okay, so let's look at method 2. Method 2 is creating bind runes. So here's an example of bind runes. So there are several styles. I don't know what other people call them. I call them layer style and stave style. So if you look, here is a layered style of a particular rune where I kind of layered the different runes on top of each other to create this sigil. There's also, oh, I'm sorry, this is the stave style. Somehow the presentation messed up. This is the stave style. If you look here, this is more of like that layered style, right? So I layered them onto each other. But in order to make it look visibly appealing, I've repeated the symbols on both sides. So you'll see there's kind of like this mirrored image of it, right? So what I did was this one is just stave style using that central axis. This one, I use the same sigils, the same runes, and I just created this bind rune using a layered and reflective style, right? So it adds a nice level of balance to it, but it also makes it visually appealing, and it also includes all the symbols that you need. And then the final one, I apologize, this is all out of order. This should be the stave style. This is the bind rune, and then this is the layered style. So if you look here, you'll see all of them layered on top of each other into a single symbol. This is the layered style. This would be the bind rune. So when you make a bind rune, you want to make sure that it's mirrored, it's even and balanced. And then with the layered style, you're literally just layering one on top of the other to create its own unique symbol. So here's an example as well. Any questions about those? I apologize for having it wrong. My titles are in the wrong place. The next method is called magic squares. So when we talk about magic squares, a magic square or a chema is a representation of spiritual forces in a mathematical format. They are typically arranged in such a way that every row and every column equals the same number, and that's kind of where the power comes from. And those numbers have their own meaning as well. So we're going to see a couple of examples in the next slide of what a magical square looks like. So while there are numerous magical squares, this section is only going to deal with 2 of them, which are associated with the 7 planets. So each planet has their own magic square. But as we look at some of these other planets, the squares are so big, they almost become unusable, in my opinion. So I've chosen 2 to show you, to kind of give you an idea. And we're going to use these magical squares as a basis for creating our own symbol. And I'm going to show you how in just a minute. Each of the 7 classical planets have both a seal and a chema. or a magic square. Whereas the HEMA sets forces in motion, the seal brings them to a halt. So it's sealing those forces, right? There are other energies and forces associated with each HEMA. For example, intelligences, spirits, elementals, things like that. But for the purposes of this presentation, we're gonna speak only of the squares themselves instead, okay? So here's what the squares look like. So here's two magic squares. There's also in the Eastern food talisman work, there's also a magic square that looks very similar to this. And this is kind of the basis of this 9-piece square that they use. But this is actually the square of Saturn in ceremonialism. This is the square of Saturn, and it corresponds specifically to real estate, banks, debt, time, and bindings. And the color is black, and the day of the week would be Sunday, or Saturday rather. This is one example, okay? And we're gonna see how we use them to make sigils with. The other magical square is the square of Jupiter. So as you can see, this one's much bigger and there's higher numbers on it, right? So as we talk about how we can use these in sigil magic, it can get really complicated. This corresponds specifically to money. It corresponds to success, abundance, and growth. The color is blue and the day is Thursday, right? So these are just examples of magic squares. Keep these in mind because the next couple slides, we're going to talk about how we can use them. Any questions so far? All right, so how do we convert letters to numbers for sigil work, right? So this is what we use. This is kind of our decoder ring that we use to convert sigils to numbers. So let's say we're going to spell out my name. It would be 2, 7, 3, 5. 2, 7, 3, 5, right? Now we can take those numbers, we can add 2, 7, 3, 5 up to get a larger number, which would then give us maybe a numerological value that we can use in sigil work, or we can leave the numbers as 4 separate numbers and use them in our sigil work. So let's look at the second part of the slide, which is the symbol for the sigil that we used here a moment ago, which is the magic square of, oh, I'm sorry, this is not wanting to go back. Oh, there's a lag, I apologize. Oops. The magic square of Saturn, right? So here's the magical square of Saturn. So let's say that we're gonna convert the word for love. And we're gonna convert that using the symbol or the sigil for Saturn. So love, L 3 O 6 V 4 E 5. So I'm simply gonna trace those numbers on this square, and it's going to give me this sigil, right? We start the sigil using a circle or using a dot, and then we end the sigil by putting like a line at the end of the line. So it looks like a T almost, like a little T off, right? And so because we're using the magic square of Saturn, which has to do with binding, we use the word for love, we apply it to the sigil, now we create a symbol to bind someone in love. Just as an example. So this would be the sigil. And we can take this sigil and we can use it in many different ways. And we're going to talk about that later. But here's an example. Does that make sense? We converted the letter, the word from words to numbers. We use the numbers and superimpose the numbers on the magic square to create this sigil. Does that make sense? Okay. So here's another example of some magic squares that you might see. So this is a wheel that uses the Hebrew alphabet, obviously, right? And here's what's called the rose cross. And the rose cross, there's a lot of symbols in here. So you'll see here, there's like the rose cross in the middle with the same wheel here. And then you'll see there's, this looks, you know, it's yellow, so I'm guessing it's probably, this actually is for fire because it has a Leo in here, in Aries. So this is fire. Well, there's a Leo and Aries there too. Aquarius. I'm not sure. But these are all different symbols that are kind of chopped in here. And then you'll see there's symbols for the planets as well. So here's another example. And this is kind of, again, like a decoder. We look at this and we can see all these layers of symbols and how they relate to one another. So I just wanted to show that to you for context. Any questions about those so far? This is just examples. So in this slide, we're actually going to use the witch's wheel. So you're gonna see I've given you all a copy of the witch's wheel, but this is what it looks like. It's the English version of the Hebrew version I just showed you. And so if you look, you'll see A through Z in the wheel. And so what I did was I just used the word health and I created my own sigil using the word health. So I start with H. I find H, where's H? H. E. A. L. T. H. Right? Health. So I use this to create the sigil. So now this is what the sigil looks like. It starts here, all the way down and around, and it ends here. So this is what the sigil for health might look like. Pretty simple, right? We're using the witch's wheel, we're coding these words into symbols, and then we can use these symbols in our sigil work. Any questions about that? We're gonna get a chance to practice.
What if you need like 2 O's or something?
Great example. So this is how I teach sigil work. When you start the word, you start with a circle or a dot, right? So health would start with this circle. Let's say that
Like good, for example.
let's use good. So we start with good. So we would do G would have the circle. The 2 O's would get a square to represent that they are doubled. So G, circle, line, square. And then D would have a line across it, showing that it's like how this has a line at the end of that last line, showing you that this is the end of it. So it would be circle, square, and then it would be a line across, showing that it's the end of the line. Great example. That's how I would teach it, using a square to indicate doubled words. So, any more questions about this before we move on? Because we're going to get time to practice. Okay, so let's look at method 4. Method 4 is creating with the alphabet, with the English alphabet. So this method utilizes the English alphabet to create a unique sigil. This method can also be applied to creating your own personal sigil. So you could use it to use it for your magical signature, or you could use it simply to become a single complete sigil for whatever you're doing. So the instructions, here's what I want you to do. I want you to choose a word that represents your goal or your intention. I want you to cross out any repeating letters. I want you to take the remaining consonants and create a unique sigil with them. So you're crossing out any repeated letters and vowels. So let's pretend we use the word good, like Johnny had given us, G-O-O-D. O is a vowel and it's also a repeated letter. So we would cross out both O's and we would only have G and D. Okay, so then we take the remaining consonants of G and D and we create a unique sigil with those 2 letters. And I'm going to show you what that looks like. And then we're going to apply any additional symbols or amplifying signs to the design. I know it's abstract. I'm going to show you in the next slide what that looks like. So here's my example. I used wealth. So we took wealth and we crossed out all of the vowels. So now we have W-L-T-H. And I used 2 examples to show you what that looks like. So I have my WLTH and I did a layering style, right? So you see W, you'll see L, you see T, and then you see the H, right? So I used this to create, but see what I did, as I actually added some arrows to the top of each point. So now, not only is it red, but it also gives me this sense of like growth, upward direction, right? It's kind of like adding this energy, and I can take this sigil and now I turn it and I use it in the ways we're going to talk about in just a minute. Here's one example. The other example is I use WLTH and I drew it in kind of a square format. And if you look, there's the W, there's the L, there's the T, and then there's the H right here. And what I did was I put it in yellow, because yellow represents gold, yellow represents money. And then I added some amplifying lines. So I put some cross lines here to kind of add this energy. And then what I did was I put circles around where they intersected. And the circles represent coins, right? And represent that money. So I took that symbol and I turned it into this, and now this is my sigil. But of course, that means something to me. Johnny might look at this and say, well, this doesn't mean anything to him. But to me, I see it and I say, okay, this to me represents wealth and prosperity and growth and increase because of all this money, these coins and the gold and the money and the coins and the gold, right? Again, this is just an example that I whipped up quickly, but here's another example of the sigil. Any questions about this? All right, let's do another activity. So what I want you to do is I want you to use your phone in the PDF that you were given, or you can use the handout if you have a handout, if you printed it out. And I want you to create your own magical signature. So you can use the bind rune method, you can use the layer method, you can use the witch's wheel, you can use this method.
Paper for that?
No.
No.
No, we're not using the tracing paper just yet. But we're gonna use all the things we've talked about. We're gonna use these different methods. So method one is this, right? The stave style. Method two is the bind runes. So this would be the bind runes, using the bind runes. Method three is using a magical square. Method four would converting your name into letters and then using the magic square to create your sigil. Or using the witch's wheel. Excuse me. Excuse me. Or method four, crafting with the alphabet, using this style where we create our own sigil. So take just a few minutes and create your own magical signature right now. Use the white paper. Yeah. I'm gonna just cut all this part out in the editing process. Yeah, use that.
Can I do initials?
Yeah, that's the initials are great because with initials, those are always gonna be your initials, right? So JRK.
You said we begin it with a circle, we use this,
Mhm.
and then we end it. How do we end it again?
With like a line. Let me see. So like at the end of the line, you would put like a T like that, and it's showing like it's the end of the line. Good job. All right, good job, everybody. Let's go on to activity number three. So activity number three is I want you to create a sigil with the following words. So you could use any method you want that we've already discussed in the workshop. You could use your own knowledge, you could use your imagination and use your own insight. And I want you to make 3 sigils using all the things we've talked about. So if, again, use your PDF or if you printed out the PDF, use that information for you. And you can use anything you want. You could use a magic square if you want. You could use the witch's wheel and use your tracing paper. So you would just take your tracing paper and you would put it over the magic wheel and you could create the sigil that way. You can use convert the word for protection into runes or into the Pictish alphabet or into Theban alphabet, whatever you want to do. Take a few minutes and create your own sigil for the following words: protection, prosperity, and your choice. You can come up with wealth, you can do wellness, you can do health, you can do whatever you want. Come up with 3 sigils.
Do you want each word to be a separate sigil?
Yes.
A separate kind?
Yeah. Yeah, you could do 3 of the same. If you want to do 3 using the witch's wheel, that's fine. If you want to do 1 with the witch's wheel, 1 with runes, that's fine too. Whatever you want to do, use these activities, these methods to create your own sigil. And don't hesitate to get creative with this. I want you to really tap into that creative energy to do this, right? So you can, let's say that you're going to use protection and you're going to convert the word protection into the Theban script. Now that you have it in the Theban script, what are you going to do with it? right? Are you gonna make it into a symbol? Are you gonna make it into a circle, into a square, into a, maybe you could use the image of a square, right? Think of our homes, or think of a walled city, it's in a square, right? Maybe I take those letters of Thebian and I draw it and write it in a square, right? To show protection. Now I'm in this, and that itself becomes the sigil, right? We're gonna talk more about how we can put all of these moving pieces together to help us as we go forward. So we'll get some more into that later. But for right now, just get comfortable using the alphabets, using all of this. You can use the other method where you remove the vowels and the repeating letter. So example, for protection, you might remove O, E, I, O. And so you have P, R, T, C, T, N. And you take those letters and you use them to create your own sigil with. So take that time, work over that, and we'll talk about it. All right, so I hope that was exciting and fun for you. It was fun for me. Let us take time to move on and talk a little bit about kind of getting ourselves acquainted with some of the meanings of these symbols. So let's talk about symbols and their correspondences. Right. So symbols are the language that our subconscious mind uses when we're working with magic. Wicca has an extensive network of correspondences that we use that inform all that we do, both in ritual and in magic. One symbol may create or be correlate to a whole network of meanings that are related to colors, to elements, to attributes, to qualities, to cardinal directions, to colors, to numbers. I mean, it just, the list goes on. The list goes on and on and on. All information is meaningful when we're creating symbols because our mind will pick up on these subtleties regardless. So it's important. In this section, we're going to review some of the meanings of common symbols. These are things that you probably already know about, but we're going to go through them anyway. So the first list of series are the elemental symbols, right? So fire. Fire is a upward facing triangle because fire goes up, burns up, right? Fire is masculine. Fire relates to the direction of the south. It's related to things like love, romance, light. It's related to success. It's related to the sun. It's related to the athame or the sword. Okay, fire. These are very limited because, again, for time purposes and etc. Earth. Earth is that downward facing because Earth is down. Earth is feminine. Earth is north. Earth is money and abundance. The color green is associated with money and abundance. The color red is associated with love, romance. Do you see this connection? Earth is related to planting, to commerce, to fertility, and to the tool of the pentacle. The element of air is yellow. Air is also masculine. Air is the direction of the east. Air focuses on things like dreams, intellect, discernment, communication. Air is also truth, and air relates to the tool of the wand. Again, yellow represents communication. Yellow represents intellect. Again, see the connections. Water. The element of water is a downward facing triangle, and it is blue because water is down, right? Water takes the path of least resistance, right? So water is feminine. Water is to the direction of the west. Water represents beauty, birth, compassion. Water represents peace and longevity, and water is represented on the altar by the tool of the chalice. Again, blue represents beauty, birth, compassion. Blue represents peace and longevity. So I've given you an entire network of symbols just in this moment. The color is a symbol. The shape is a symbol. These correspondences are symbols. This is an entire constellation of symbols. So that will also be in your PDF and your handout, so review it. The next set is the planets. So these are the symbols that we use to represent the planets. I want you to start thinking how you could use these symbols to create your own sigil, right? And I'm going to give you an example about that in a little bit. So I'm not going to go through all of these, but I just want to kind of highlight, right? So for example, the sun. This is what the sun looks like in our symbolism. Very similar to the Chinese version. The sun represents strength, unity, guidance, balance, the all-purpose amplifier for yang energy or masculine, powerful energy. The moon looks like this. Pretty simple. We all know what this looks like. The moon represents balance, cycles, creativity, dreams, death, family, fertility, healing, intuition, peace, power, rebirth, spirits. It is also a great yang or yin feminine energy amplifier. So I want you to start thinking about how you could use some of these symbols. Let's say that you're creating a sigil to increase communication in your relationship. So you might use the symbol for Mercury. Because we're talking about relationships, you might also want to include Venus. So Mercury and Venus, those symbols included in your sigil when you're talking about creating for communication in your relationships, right? So here's all the examples. These are all the symbols. You're going to come back to these, but you're going to get a chance to see them in real time. Any questions about the planetary symbols? All right, here are some astrological symbols, right? The 12 astrological signs, the zodiac. So each one of these is a whole constellation in and of itself. We know that each of these are personality types, and each personality type has different aspects. In addition to that, there is some metaphysical and other symbols that are connected to this. So for example, I'm a Leo. Let's look at Leo. This is a symbol for Leo, and Leo represents authority, confidence, friendship, generosity, their guardian, loyalty, and strength. So if I am doing a sigil where I want to incorporate confidence or generosity, I can use Leo and put that as part of my sigil. We have to remember that when we talk about sigil work becomes like a language. We're using these symbols to create a language or to even write out in symbols what we want, because our subconscious mind uses symbols to create connections and uses those symbols to engage with reality. So all of that is part of this process. When we create sigils, we're using these symbols or signs to speak that language symbolically. Does that make sense? Here's another example. This is in the public domain, so this isn't my favorite version of runes, but this is a great example of the runes and their meanings. So in addition to being a magical alphabet, runes also have their own individual meaning. So things like radio means ride or travel, right? Tyr means warrior or could be used for protection. Othala, and this way I think it's written in Old English, represents home or means estate, property, right? It's kind of that enclosure of our life. Manus means man or person, right? And so each one of these symbols represent birch, Bertha means birth, right? Gabo means gift or exchange or gift giving, right? Wunjo means joy. So all of these symbols have their own meaning. And with their own meaning, you could use the meaning of the symbol in addition to the letter that it represents in either writing out a word or to represent the meaning of something. So again, this is not my favorite example. These are not Futhark runes. As you can see, some of these runes are different than the other ones I showed you earlier, but this is in public domain, so I borrowed it. Any questions about the runes and their symbols, their meanings? Okay. Let's look at images really quickly. So we can use images in our sigil work very easily, especially now in the day of modern technology and digital renderings and digital reproduction. We can use images in our sigils very easily. So the use of images in sigil craft, it's possible not only to include the hand-drawn symbols, but also to include images in our work. A really common image or a stock symbol that's really common is, of course, the pentacle, right? We can use the pentacle to represent so many things in that moment, just drawing, right? It's already there. It's already in our collective unconscious as a meaning. we could use other images. So like maybe for example, a specific god or goddess, we might include the picture of Bridget in our sigil. Maybe we include an image of an animal, or we include the image of a plant whose energies that we want to invoke in the sigil, right? Let's say, for example, in my mind, I believe that elephants represent family or nurturing care. So I want to do a magic to incorporate or bring in this energy of family and nurturing care. And then I put an image of an elephant or draw an image of an elephant or get an image of an elephant offline that I print out and I include with my sigil. Or maybe I want to do something with love and I get an image of a rose and I put the image of the rose on there as well as my sigil, right? So now I'm layering these different images into my sigil work. Pretty cool, right? Any questions about that? All right, so the pièce de résistance. How do we put it all together? What do we do to put all of this together so that we can make it work for us in our sigil work? Okay, so here's what you want to do. Here's how you want to put it all together. Let's be practical about this. So after you've decided what you want to use your sigil on, you can use that intention to create the sigil with the information and the resources that I've given you today in this presentation. So I want you to consider the following. What are you going to use the sigil for? What are you going to draw your sigil on? Is the sigil going to be on your body? Is it going to be on a piece of paper? Is it going to be on the bottom of your shoes? It's really common for people to put like protection sigils on the bottom of their shoes if you have like a leather sole. Or on a candle, you could inscribe it on a candle, you can draw it or even paint it on a candle, right? Maybe you want to draw it on your body. You know, we can use so many things. Maybe you get it tattooed.
Protection
What's that?
on a door.
On a door, right? You could draw it on a door. Maybe you use chalk and you write it on the door. Maybe you actually scratch it into the door. Or maybe you use paint to put on your body, or maybe you even use your saliva. That sounds weird, but the saliva does the same thing, right? I draw it on my body and I empower it and it becomes part of me in that moment, right? And even if my saliva is dried, it's still there, right? These kind of things we have to think outside the box rather. So how do we activate it? What do you want to do to activate it? How might you dispose of the sigil once it's completed? And how will you release the energy once it's completed? Sometimes the activation and the release are the same thing. So we're going to talk about how we do that. So activity number 4. I want you to create the following sigils. Okay, for someone who is looking for success in business, for someone who is struggling with a difficult neighbor. So I want you to use all of the symbols that we've created today, or all that you've learned today, the elemental symbols, the use of the sigils and the witch's wheel, and I want you to create a sigil for each of these. So this is complicated though, right? It's not just health, it's not just business. We're taking multiple symbols and we're creating a sigil with them. So this is our activity, and I don't want you to forget, do not forget to sign with your magical signature. But because it's a real sigil, we're going to use our red pen. So if you haven't been using your red pen, make sure you start using your red pen, and we're going to create sigils for success in business and for struggling with a difficult neighbor. Don't forget to sign it. Then we'll come back and talk about it. Yeah.
So the sigil and magic signature, right? Do I use the red pen for both?
Yeah. So let's start out with something simple, right? So someone who's looking for success in business. So why don't we do?
I have one that works for both.
Right, and as you're continuing to do this activity, I want you to kind of think, and I'm going to show you the examples that I came up with for mine too. But I want you to think about how you can use maybe some of the symbols about like the zodiac signs, or maybe the planetary symbols. How can you incorporate some of that energy? If you're going to include a image, what image might you use for success in business or to help someone who's struggling with a neighbor? Think outside of the box, and then I'm going to show you the ones that I came up with, and I'm going to talk you through why I came up with that. So keep thinking about it, keep brainstorming, and we're going to check back in. Alrighty, so let us come back together and talk about what we came up with. So I want to show you the one that I did. These are the ones that I came up with. So if you look, I just did these on the computer, just to make it easier for me to show you. So this is what I did for success in business. So if you look on this one, there are the sun, right? All this increase, right? Energy, 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 success, success, energy, increase. And then I included a sigil here using the witch's wheel. I included a bind rune using the layered method. I included a planetary symbol, and I also included the symbol for Capricorn as well. So I created this slip, that we could use. It could give it to the person who wants success in business, whatever. Obviously this would be hand drawn if I was doing it by hand, but again, I just digitized it for you. And then on the other side here, I incorporated some repetitive things here too. So dealing with a difficult neighbor, I have the symbol for home, the symbol for protection, so protecting the home. And then I included a barrier or boundary, and inside I put the symbol for Taurus, which is that sort of like bull in the pen, right? Very protective. Don't come in here. If you come in here, you're going to get the horns, right? Very protective. And then under here, under this bell, which is part of the food talisman work, under this bell, I have increase in sun. I also included Aries, the ram, some more Aries, and then I have this symbol here. So if you look at this, it's very simply saying protection of the home. And then all of this here, if you think about it, just think about if you were living in a house and you had all this protection. There are rams behind the door and there's a bull with the horns, right? So if you come in here, you're going to get hurt. So dealing with a difficult neighbor, it's all about protection. So maybe for dealing with a difficult neighbor, you used a different approach or a different idea. Maybe it's more about increasing communication or whatever it is, right? However you chose to do it. Same thing for success in business. What does success mean for you? How do you incorporate that and create a sigil with it? In my case, I was more focused on protection. How do I deal with a difficult neighbor? I protect from them, right? I can't change their behavior maybe, or maybe I'm trying not to change their behavior, but what I can do is I can set up defenses to protect myself and my family. So that's what my sigil was all about in this particular one. Yours may have been different. Variety is great, variety is great. Any questions about these examples? Okay, so here are some creative uses for your sigils. You could take them and you could write them on your skin with ink. You could use anointing oil. You could use your own saliva. You could write them on the soles of your shoes or on something that you carry with you. You can write them on paper and either keep the paper on you or burn the paper to release it. You can write them in some external medium, like in sand, in the dirt, or even I saw one example where someone used bird seed, which I thought was really cool. You draw it out in the bird seed and the birds come and they eat it and they're sending that blessing. They're sending that energy out there. You could make your sigil into jewelry and wear it. It's really cool to, if you have like a tool where you could etch into things, like an etching tool, you could use glass, you could use metal, you can etch, you could use like polymer clay and use the clay and create your sigil that way. You can combine it with other forms of magic, like Johnny gave the example of carving into candles and using it for candle magic. You can use it for petition magic. In traditional ceremonial magic, they often make wax tablets. So very thin layers of wax that they will then inscribe with their sigil and use that. And then maybe when they're done, they melt it or burn it as a way to kind of release it, right? So all sorts of creative activities. What are some other ways that you can think of using sigils for?
you could use it on, something like a Christmas decoration to protect your home during the holidays.
Oh, I like that. Yeah, use it as like as a decoration for the holidays, right? As an ornament or a bauble, or even put it by the door, like Johnny said earlier, right? That's a great example. Let's move on. Here are some resources for further study. So a good primer or encyclopedia on symbols, something like the one I mentioned earlier, the Illustrated Signs and Symbols Source Book. Really great resource. I actually tabbed a couple of places in mine that I thought were really cool. So one of them that I thought was really, really cool, and I've seen this elsewhere before, is travelers signs and hobo symbols. So, you know, back in the day when people would like, maybe some people still do it now, you know, where they were like homeless and they would like tag certain places or houses or directions, like, hey, go this way for safety, or go that way to stay away from the police, or take, you know, jump on the train and take the train, you know, wherever. And so I thought that was really cool, like incorporating some of these symbols in, you know, this book is a great book. It has all sorts of, you know, symbols. It talks about numbers. It talks about planetary symbols, runes, magical alphabets, you name it, it's in this book. So I would definitely recommend a primer for that. If you are interested in sigil witchery, definitely, like I mentioned earlier, this book, Sigil Witchery by Laura Tempest Zakroff, great book. Also consider The Tao of Craft by Ben Wen. If you're interested in more of that Eastern esoteric piece, this is a great book, and she even finds ways to incorporate and include it in Eastern and Western sort of metaphysics. That's really great. There's also the Llewellyn's Complete Book of Correspondences. I didn't bring that one with me, but this book is amazing. This was written maybe 2020, 2021, somewhere around there. And it's a huge volume, and it has every correspondence you can think of in there. If you are looking up a correspondence for a certain plant, it gives you the element, it gives you the planetary alignment, it gives you the, you know, alchemical symbol. I mean, it gives you everything with everything. It's like an encyclopedia. You just find what you're looking for, and it'll give you everything you need. It's a great book. Buy it. A good book on magical alphabets for divination and magic, such as Taking Up the Runes by Diana Paxson. Great book. It gives some information about how the runes are used, some of the history about them, how they were developed. It's amazing. There's another great book, I think it's out of print now, but it's called Omens, Oghams, and Oracles by Richard Webster. A great book if you're really interested in the Ogham alphabet. Another idea potentially could be something like a book on ceremonial magic, as well as seal and sigil work. Something like Modern Magic by Donald Michael Craig, or the Illustrated Goetia, or even just any Goetia, you know, that has those seals and symbols in it and helps you to kind of understand the use and creation of those symbols. So these are just some great resources for you if you're looking to do that. So we have one final activity to do together today. And this activity is creating a magical sigil for good luck and prosperity in the coming year. So this is an example of what they look like. This is one that I did in my red pen. And then this is one that I did using the traditional Chinese method of writing with ink and brushes. So this is a great example of what this looks like. If you look here, there is a ink stone for putting in ink. There's a place for water. There's a brush stand. I have red ink that I used to make that sigil with. And then there's also a stamp. And then here are the brushes that you can use for drawing that. So I took pictures, but I have the originals with me today. And if you look, this is the one that I did with the brush. And this is the one that I did with the ink pen. And if you look at the bottom, you'll see that I wrote my seal as well with my magical name. And I stamped it with cinnabar paste stamp, which is a traditional Chinese food form. But what I want us to do is I want you to copy this sigil as it's here. And we're going to use them as good luck charms in the coming year. So go ahead and take up your piece of paper that I gave you. And we are going to draw, and then when we're done, we're going to take it and we're going to put it into one of these little bags, and we're going to hang it up for good luck and prosperity. So take your time to draw this. and we will go from here. I want to show you exactly what,
The one on the left you want us to draw?
that'll probably be easier to see. I'll give you this, you can copy it.
Do we do the stamp?
Take your
too?
time. Yes. You're gonna do it though with your magical sigil, with your magical name rather.
Oh, yeah.
So let me walk you through what you're looking at here. And this is the kind of the secret closed practice piece. The top symbol means,
Is it this one?
mhm. The top symbol means D, which means God. So like under the authority of God or of spirit. And then I have the symbol for earth, representing the goddess, and I have the symbol for the sky. In this case, I put it at Jupiter, but in reference of Jupiter, I meant like the sky. Jupiter's the sky god. So god and goddess. And then there's this what they call the house, which is again, it's a food talisman thing. And if you look here along the side, you have all these squares going down the sides. Those squares represent what's called a yang amplifier. So I'm amplifying energy, energy, energy. And then in the middle, I put Berkana, the rune for new beginnings and growth. And then underneath it, it looks like scribbles, but really it's what's called cloud script. And I wrote in cloud script, I invoke, and then I put use the witch's wheel to create individual sigils for good luck and prosperity in the coming year. And then I put some more cloud symbols and I ended it with Berkana again. So you'll see each one of these pieces to this sigil is intended for a very particular purpose. And around all of it is that amplifying, increase, increase, increase. So take a moment to do your very best. I know these look like scribbles, but I want you to do your very best to try to copy it as it's written here. And at the bottom, you're going to draw a square, and then you're going to put another smaller square inside that square, and that's where you're going to draw your magical signature to seal this work. And then after that, this is when you would normally empower it. And then we're going to take it and we're going to put it into one of these bags, and we're going to use it for our work. So take a moment to do that as this final activity, and then you can carry this with you, or you can hang it up at home to bring prosperity and good luck for the new year. You have a preference on what color you want, Johnny? Do you want a tassel or not a tassel?
Pick one for me, spread me.
Okay, let's go with this one. Very good. Good job on that.
I use my initials for my signature here.
Alrighty, so let me show you. I'm gonna get mine. Actually, I'm gonna use one with a tassel. And I have the one that I drew, and I'm gonna fold it up. I'm gonna fold it up. Like so, and I'm gonna fit it into my little pouch. Now, to add some context to these pouches, this is what's called an omimori. Omimori is a Japanese word that is specifically used for this kind of work. So with omamori, you would purchase an omamori for a particular purpose, and inside the omamori would be inscribed something similar, like a talisman, and then on the talisman would be a seal with the name of the temple or the shrine that you got it from, and then it would also probably include something about the specific god or kami that you would be petitioning for the blessing. So it would have the name of the kami, petition for the blessing, and then it would have the seal of the temple or the person who created it. And then you would wear this or keep it with you as a practice. And then written on the pouch, it has like blessings, good luck, and good fortune. So now that we've done that, we have our own little thing we can take with us and carry with us as a blessing for the coming year. So I hope that this presentation was helpful for some of you. And I thank you all for watching and for being here and participating in this presentation. And now we have something to take with us. And we also have some great knowledge that we can use and apply to our magical work. So I thank you all for watching, and until next time, signing off for now.